I'd like to thank Gilded.gg for sponsoring this video again. Now, Gilded is a longtime supporter of this channel and has just launched their scrim finder for Overwatch, making it easy to find teams to practice against and to play against, which I know a lot of people have a problem finding. Now, they're running a matchmaking system this weekend, Friday and Saturday, so if you're up for that, ready up your team and schedule a match this weekend at Gilded.gg/matchmaking. So today I'm talking about VALE playing Mercy, the new NERF Mercy that now takes 1.75 seconds to get a res off. I feel like overall she's much worse versus dive and death call comps, but pretty good still against slow push comps and versus spam comps, so you still can definitely play her. Now a few times during this game we're going to see VALE maybe going in a little bit too deep for the reses because he is still used to, the old Mercy that could get all those super risky reses off. But other than that, I feel like there's a ton to be learned from this player, and he's, even in this game alone, really kind of getting used to it. Also with that said, if you do want to see exact tips, just before the video even starts, in the description below I do have all the tips written down that I'm going to talk about, or at least that I wrote down before I started to make this video. So there you go with that if you want to get these really quick. Anyways, to get started off, at the beginning of this game, before the game even started, as like I see with every other single support player, he actually looked at what his teammates were playing, their most played heroes, he kind of suggested who they might want to play, the team comp that they want to go for. Overall, I see support players doing this all the time. Support players usually do that, and usually as well do kind of, get their team to wait, to play together. That's kind of the job that you can try to focus on, and it will win you a lot of games other than simply just getting good at your character. As well, at the beginning of this game, we actually saw VALE asking his teammate to get shields, either from the Zarya or from, the Reinhardt when he is trying to res. Especially Zarya, I feel like can be good, because if Zarya shields you, they either have to give Zarya a charge or give you the free res. So either way, it's kind of a win-win for you guys. Now, it's not the best if you die, but still, getting reses off the shield is a good idea for you. Fortunately, a few times during this game, there's not really anyone for Mercy to fly to. His team's just a little bit too close together, either, just kind of next to each other in the back line or next to each other in the front line. So Genji does jump on him quite a few times, and during the second point, we actually see a switch onto Pharah, which helps a ton against that. If you can get a Pharah, it'll make so that Genji doesn't really counter you anymore. You can just get away from him and stay safe during his ultimate. However, if you have a comp like VALE has right now, it can be kind of hard for you to deal with Genji. Another thing I want to talk about, though, that we're seeing right now, even though his team is kind of losing the first points, getting stomped a little bit, he is often, getting a lot of really nice reses out, getting a lot of nice healing out, and staying alive. For the most part, he's always consistently healing around corners, always consistently healing around walls, and then of course, when he knows that the enemies don't have any hit scan up, he'll fly out in the open and just try to get the most field of view as possible and try to get as much healing as possible. Another thing that should be mentioned, though, other than, getting out the healing and the reses, is that he constantly uses the flying to barely get in range to heal his teammates, while still, staying far in the back line, hopefully not getting picked off by anybody else. It's kind of hard, but as you see, he cancels it literally all the time. And that's something you might want to kind of get used to. As well, he does use that weird little trick where if you jump at the end of your shift or at the end of your flying or whatever, it kind of makes you fly further. We just saw it right there. A little bit awkward, but it makes it so that you can get to the places that you want to be faster. And it's one of those tips, I guess one of those things you just kind of have to learn as Mercy if you want to become really good at this character. It's one of her only really big tech skill type of things, other than just decision making. That's a thing you can kind of learn. Again, I want to kind of say, his team did kind of get stomped on first point, but, they're holding it back on the second point. And something you kind of want to remember is that if your team is doing badly, just tell them to group up, go back, and reset. If you can just get your team to reset after you're losing that match, you can win the match for your team quite often. I know, it's kind of hard because sometimes people will just keep going in, but if you keep pressing your team to come back and to wait for each other, you might be able to win the game by yourself. I've had many games just playing Ana and Mercy where, just by telling my teammates to wait up for each other, we've been able to regroup, hold the second or third point for much longer than we were able to hold the first point, and eventually come back. That can win you games, and again, shot calling as this character probably is one of those things that you should be trying to do if you do want to win games. Back to healing around corners, we see a lot of that right here. For the most part, he doesn't really just hide right behind his teammates, as I see a lot of Mercy's doing. He does hide around walls, hide around corners, hide around really anything so that he can't just be randomly sniped. You essentially want to play as if the enemy team always has a Hanzo and always has, maybe the opportunity to one-shot you, because if the enemy Genji is really good, he probably can one-shot you. And, if you can play like that, and if you can play safely like that, you might be able to win. Right here we see an early ultimate. It's a good idea to go for early ults, by the way, as Mercy, because you can heal for the entirety of the team fight, or damage boost for the entirety of the team fight. You get your second res, and if especially somebody gets picked on your team early on, and you ult and then res, it allows so that you can get off that free res, because when you're resing, your res ability doesn't actually take any cooldown. It has no cooldown. I mean, not when you're resing. When you're using your ultimate, your res has no cooldown. There we go with that. But while you are not resing, of course, it does have that super long cooldown. So kind of go with that. And then finally, you know, they're trying to defend as long as they can. I thought it was a pretty good counter defend, but no one's really dealing with the Genji still, and we don't really see that until the second point. His team finally switches off to try to deal with that character. But, you know, he's trying his best. The Genji is just kind of stomping house. And I guess one final thing to say about this game is that when he is ulting, he does essentially just stay up in the air for the most part when there's no hit scan and when, you know, Genji's going after him. But I think later on they do eventually switch to a hit scan, so he does go high up into the air. The Genji can't kill you if you get to a certain distance in the air, so that's something that you kind of have to keep in mind. And then eventually his team does just all die and then C9 on this first point. Kind of unfortunate. Overall, I want to say that his team just kind of got stomped on the first point. He was doing the best that he possibly could. He got a ton of healing out, a ton of reses out, but it just didn't work out the best for him, and that sometimes does happen. And even in Grandmaster games, that still does happen. And remember that even if your team does get stomped on first point, especially on offense, you can still stomp yourself on your first point on offense. That's just something you kind of have to get used to. Just because your team maybe doesn't do the best on defense doesn't mean that you won't do any good on offense. You can often kind of tie it right there. Right here, you know, goes for a super good res, gets his teammates up. For the most part, I think resing your people just closer to the backline is a good idea. You can try to go for more important reses, like, let's say, the person on the point right now, if we still had res up. But it's often just too risky, and you kind of just have to, you know, pivot risk versus reward. And most of the time, it's better to get somebody that's, like, you know, half as strong in the team fight, but you don't die. That's kind of how that goes. During this game, the enemy team actually does have a lot more of a spam comp, and the Mercy player asks for Pharah on his own team, asks if they can get one of those, and it actually works out pretty well. Now, there is a soldier on the enemy team, so that is kind of a hard thing to deal with. But still, getting that far on your team allows you to deal with the spam comp. It allows you to get a ton of mobility, as I was saying earlier, and it allows so that the enemy soldier can't really kill you way too easily. As well, if the enemy still had a Genji on defense, which, you know, isn't the best, but if they did, it allows so that you can fly away from the Genji so much easier. Having a Pharah on your team essentially makes so that Genji doesn't really counter you anymore. While if there is not a Pharah on your team, again, the Genji can hurt you unless you have your ultimate up. And even if you have your ultimate up, you still do have to actually go in to get your reses off, which can kind of hurt you. Right there he goes for, again, another really early ult, sees that a team fight is coming up, and reses immediately after he gets the Lucio shield. That's something you can go for and something you probably want to go for. You shouldn't really just try to jump into the middle of a team fight by yourself, even with your ult up, if you don't have a shield of some sort. You're probably just going to die, and even though you might get a res, going 1-for-1 really isn't the best, and then your team's down a healer, kind of hurts your team quite a bit. So if you can just wait like he did, like VALE did, that can help you, and that can essentially just win the team fight for you, as we saw right there. You just kind of want to remember that your ult is extremely important now, because it does allow for just the instant reses, and especially versus dive comps, I think it's even better, because, you know, it allows for those instant reses. So even if someone dives you and you die, you can at least get 1 or 2 reses off. So that's just so important to try to just keep track of. During this game, the enemy team do have hit scans, so that does make it kind of harder for Valve as a player. Unfortunately, the soldier gets like a super good ult right there and kind of just pops off on their team, on Valve's team. One thing, though, that you can kind of keep in mind is that even if you do, you know, get a pretty good push, but then the enemy team does pop off on you and kill your whole team, you can still win games off of small, consistent pushes. You don't need one huge push that goes all through the map so that you have a ton of time at the end. No, if you end with 1 more second than the other players on the enemy team, that's still a win in the books. So, I don't know. That's kind of how it goes. I think too many people rely on singular pushes all the time. While singular pushes are important and something that you should try to go for, of course, you know, you can still win with these slow pushes. Right here, he ults, tries to go for that res right there. Unfortunately, his, what was it? His Pharah wasn't in range, so he couldn't really fly off to her, and I think the Pharah switched off, actually. Yeah, unfortunately for Valve as a player. The Pharah switched off, now we have a Widow. It makes it kind of hard for Mercy to get away, as we saw right there, because there was no one in the sky to fly to. If there was a Pharah, he could have easily lived off of that, or maybe even if just the Widowmaker was more in range, he could have lived. But, you know, just no one was there. He got stuck in a corner. It was kind of hard. He did go 1-for-1, so in the end, it wasn't too bad. But his team did kind of get wiped right there. But that's kind of, I guess, where your decision making has to go in. Are you worth the one death? And a lot of the times you kind of will be, and especially if you can bait off a Genji ult just for yourself while you also do get a res, and that can win you a fight, obviously. Right here, he's staying on high ground, jumping on this, making sure that he doesn't get hit by anything like the the Reinhardt ultimate. So that's pretty nice. And I guess some final stuff about this point is that we saw a nanoing soldier again, which kind of hurts, but if you have your own soldier that is nanoing, if you can actually give them your alt fire and damage boost a nanoed soldier, it makes it so broken that I don't know, you can just maul through almost any team, and especially if they don't have someone like a diva to block it, or if the diva's out of defense matrix, or if they just don't really have their shield up, like if you've taken out that shield, it's worth it almost all the time. Right there, Valve had the decision, do I want to res the soldier or do I want to res the Reinhardt? The Reinhardt probably, he even said it himself, would have been a better choice if he could have gotten it off, but he took the safer route and res the soldier, and as you see, it worked out pretty well, because he could damage boost the soldier, get a lot of ult charge, get a lot of just healing off that guy, and they actually won the point right there. So even though he kind of wanted to get the more important Reinhardt pick, he got the guy that he could get safely, and then eventually gets his ult up, and it just works out for them. Remember that safety is often more important as New Mercy than getting, quite as good of reses all the time. It is kind of awkward because for the most part before, you didn't really have to think about that, but you really do have to think about that right now. As well, right there, we did see that, his team was down one person, but by getting a res, you could even up the fight, and even if you don't know if it'll win you the fight, often you should just go for it, because the res is only on a 30-second cooldown anyway. If you lose that fight, well, by the time the next fight starts, it's probably almost already going to be up, so you shouldn't be way too worried about that. And as well, you can get a lot of HP off of the person that you resed, or a lot of damage boost damage, and charge up your ult quite a bit. So overall, yeah, res quite often, and don't be afraid that you're going to waste it. For the most part, you aren't really going to be wasting it because you're going to be charging ult charge and, all the other stuff that I did just barely say. Finally, I guess they're pushing on this point, healing up, doing whatever. It's just the kind of mercy stuff that you try to do. I think in a little bit, though, we do see that the enemy soldier tries to ult to try to get another one of those team wipe ults. And, you would think that that's pretty bad against the Mercy. Again, that's going to be hurting Valve quite a bit. But what you can do is, again, just hide around corners or hide next to your teammates. If you're hiding right next to your diva, that's a really good place to be because it makes it that it's really hard for them to kill you. Right here, though, we see him. He's just hiding around corners, hiding around high ground. I think the soldier ult is down now, so he knows, I can probably get in here, probably play pretty offensively. Goes into res the Lucio right there. And in the end, it worked out pretty well for him because he didn't really get caught out by anything. When you want to finish your Valve, what is it called? Valkyrie, by the way, you do want to make sure that you are quite a bit behind your team. And he usually does that because it puts you in a good position to, stay alive and get a res on anyone to the back of your team. Now we're off to the final three, I guess the final, the third match out of the 4 matches. Often when you get to like GM during all these games, there's a lot more matches that just offense wins a ton. That kind of happens. You kind of have to get used to it. I don't know. It's kind of weird, but you do get a lot of chances, I guess. So that's kind of nice for yourself. Speaking of chances as well, on offense, you can go for a lot more risky reses. Like right there, he went for the super risky res on the Reinhardt. Has to wait 10 seconds now, but it was kind of worth it because if he would have gotten the res, it might have been able to win that team fight. While when it didn't, his team just has to reset and kind of go on from there. Especially since one of his other teammates was already picked, it was worth a chance at least. I think his team does switch a little bit more to a dive comp right now, which works pretty well for them, especially on offense, obviously. Mercy does work okay with dive comps, you got the healing, and especially if you're ulting, I think it works great because if one of your dive comp dies in the backline, you can immediately ult them, of course, or not ult them, you can immediately res them, but as well, you can damage boost your entire dive comp at the same time, kill everyone in the backline. There's just a lot of stuff you can do right there that's really just quite helpful for yourself. Also as well though, with Diva and Winston, it makes so that you can ult and then, res people really safely. The Winston shield just allows safe reses for the most part, and of course having the Diva being able to defense matrix you, that's as well really nice to be able to be safe for yourself. Right here, he might go a little bit too far to the ground. His teammates were pretty much dead anyways though, so eventually just kind of suicides. If that happens, if your team just gets popped off, it just kind of happens sometimes. You just kind of got to get used to it, I guess. Sometimes your team just can't get the kills, and you just kind of got to deal with it. But just because they didn't win this point doesn't mean they still can't draw, and that's something that you can keep in mind. Again and again during pro games, I feel like there's just a lot more long matches, and you just kind of have to get through, I don't know, just get used to just the length of these things. And it does take a lot more endurance, I guess, because through most of the matches that I see that are like in my elo, you know, Masters, Diamond, the matches go die pretty quickly. But these ones often last, you know, a little bit longer unless they just completely stomp, which does happen sometimes. But they usually are a little bit longer. Anyways, on to this match, you know, playing pretty well. I think that we had a Zarya, maybe not. Yeah, there was a Zarya. I'm unsure if the Zarya put the shield on Mercy. No, it didn't. That probably should have been a good idea for the Zarya right there. VALE probably should have called that out, gotten the shield on himself, and then he could have easily rezzed that soldier by himself without way too much hurt. It is kind of difficult to get that going off because, of course, I think that the Zarya did use her use her shield earlier, but I guess you could have called out, you know, save your shield for me, try to use that like that. And whatever, we got the shield at least right now, and that does save us for a little bit of health. Got to res the guy right around the corner right there. One thing that's kind of weird that you can do is that you can actually res around corners really awkwardly, and as well, you can res while falling sometimes, and that makes it really hard for people to kill you, because you're falling, it's just kind of harder, especially if you have something, you know, trying to protect you, or something that kind of gets the enemy's attention. But those are some strategies that you can try to use if you do want to make sure that maybe you have a slightly higher chance to live. Finally, on defense, you know, he is going for a lot of damage boost. You want to prioritize your damage boost probably on the soldier first, then the Reinhardt to get really early Rein ults, especially early on the point. You want to, you know, damage boost the Reinhardt to get the early Rein ults. And then I guess finally the Symmetra, because if you can get some nice early Symmetra ults, that as well can win you the point pretty quickly. Unfortunately, you know, Symmetra does get kind of countered by the the Tracer ult, which is a bit of a pain, but still, you at least have to waste a Tracer ult for the enemies, where they can't, I guess, team wipe your team. So that's pretty well, that's pretty good as well. Right here, you know, again, just flying around, his team does wipe pretty well, and the enemies don't have way too much time, so if they can just keep splitting them off and wasting a lot of their time, that's pretty good. Unfortunately, there isn't, you know, the ultimate, the Valkyrie on Valve right now, but it's not way too bad because there still is the res up. And you have to remember that while your ult is so important on this character, you aren't going to lose just because it's down in the next team fight. I think one of the most important things that we actually see right here is that Valve, it's just such a good play. You know, he's healing up everybody, he's doing everything, but eventually somebody gets picked off on the sideline. I think it's the fight after this one right here. They're just mauling on everybody. It's really great. And I think actually right here he might get picked up by Zarya or something like that. I don't know, something awkward happens right here. But what does happen in a little while, I think, yeah, right there, we see somebody dies right there. And you think for most mercies, you know, I just go in there, immediately res him. Instead, he waits back, heals his teammate for a little bit, and then goes in for the res when no one else is there anymore. That's something you should try to focus on. Make sure that you aren't resing immediately when somebody dies, because if you res immediately as somebody dies, obviously there's damage headed that direction. So, you know, wait a few seconds, let the damage kind of flow somewhere else, maybe towards your tanks or anything else, and then go in for the res. And I guess that's one of the most useful tips you can hear about the new res. I think that is just extremely important. And I guess finally, at the start of a team fight, what you want to do, for sure, if you're the solo healer, is ult. You got those 20 seconds. If you're with Symmetra, you really need to get your healing out, and then play super far back, and just get your maximum range healing. And go for reses again after a few seconds after your teammates have died, and hope that you can win through that. Or maybe even just save your res for a second until the people in the very back line die, and let other people come through the teleporter. That can work pretty well too. Anyways, that's all I'm going to say about this game. This was a really long one, so sorry about that. But I feel like, you know, there's a lot to be learned about the new Mercy, because while it is just one main change, it's so important for this character, and it kind of changes overall how she's supposed to play. And as well, you know, there's just a lot of other stuff that Valve did that I feel like you could learn from. Anyways, as always, guys, thank you all for watching. Check the description below if you want to see all the tips. Just put in a simple line order. I do have to delete some of those because it doesn't really fit in my description, but, you know, it still is there, and you can check it out if you want to. If you want to see any more videos like this in the future, make sure to leave an upvote. Comment down below who you want for me to talk about in the next video, and I'll try to do it ASAP. And as always, guys, thank you all for watching, and have a wonderful day.